Mm-hmm.
And you're
Yeah.
right. Men do want to talk and be listened to. And sometimes like it's such a common experience that they're not being listened to. So then when they go on a date with one of my clients, then now they can get it all out.
Yeah.
And they're really just like so tickled to have an audience that's actually listening. So sometimes that needs to like kind of flesh out.
My guest this week is Leila Tomasone, who's a relationship and marriage coach who helps women find their way to fulfillment after she walked down this road much later in life. Coming out of a bad marriage, she determined that there had to be a better way to relate to men, a way to see them or us for who we are, for what we need, and to relate to us from a place where she could see that men really do desire to meet women's needs in abundance. Really, but that requires trust, no small amount of faith, and an S word that you may have heard, but that can sometimes be a little bit challenging. The word is surrender. And I like this word because the first problem that men and women have today is often communication. Men and women are different, and therefore men and women communicate differently. Yes, words matter. I get it. But go with me here. The way men communicate is in terms of systems, order, and hierarchy. So it's natural for men to use another S word, submission. The Bible uses that word too, so it's not at all my intention to question it. And women also communicate in terms of emotion, relationship, and feeling. So is it possible that we can add another word to our vocabulary? Surrender. Because that word in a romantic context speaks to a feeling, in a language that women can hear. I say all this in part because Leila isn't Christian. She says as much at the start of the interview, and I've taken flack for talking to non-Christians about dating and romance. But why does it seem like women outside the Christian faith are working harder at this than women inside it? I have some answers, but that's a separate discussion. Instead, I ask, for those of us who care about these issues within Christendom, what of common grace can we learn to solve these very real and pressing problems? Because Leila, as you'll hear, helped solve these problems for a faithful Christian couple who are friends of mine, which is why we're talking. And I pray that our conversation can help you do the same. In our conversation, Leila and I discussed her background leading to her transformation, relationships and women's self-worth, women learning to receive, why to listen to men, why beauty is a part of femininity, being present as a woman, and finally, submission, suppression, and surrender. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Plus, leave a comment down below letting us know what you thought. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, Leila Tomasone. Leila, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Will. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we start, I just want to thank you for blessing my friends Cheryl and Scott, which is one of the big reasons why we're talking today. I got the chance to meet them at Electric City Baptist Church in October, which was a very productive weekend for me. We had Dr. Joe Bova on for health and wellness a couple of weeks ago, and now we're speaking to you. So I'm lots of fruit is being born from that one weekend, which is I'm very grateful for.
That's so cool. I love it. Yeah. Cheryl let me know that she talked to you. And so I was excited.
So let's just start with a little bit of your background. I know the things that you talk about and the subjects that you share with both men and women, but how did you find your way into this world? It seems like a sort of a later in life kind of shift.
Definitely. Yeah. Like I said, I grew up Catholic. And I feel like my parents set a really good example for marriage. But I don't know if it's me or this generation or just like a normal issue, but I feel like what was missing was the why. Like, why did traditional marriage work so well for them and their approach? And I mean, my grandparents, my mom's side had 10 kids and tons of grandkids. And, so it's like all of the ingredients seem to be there. But for some reason, I just really wanted to rebel from all of that. And, and I did big time. And the more I rebelled, the lower my self-esteem went, like the lower my own self-valuing went because I was unsuccessful, just failing at relationships. And, that's, about men and women polarity, and women get a lot of our, self-worth from the quality of our relationships. So I ended up in a harmful, toxic marriage from, I think I got married at age 24 or 26, somewhere in there. And then, but it had been a long relationship before that. And then, I had my two beautiful girls, which really saved me in the end, because when my first husband left and there was just this horrible like custody battle. It was a high conflict divorce. The kids were in the middle. It was a nightmare. And so if it was just me, I probably would have given up, but because of my girls I couldn't, that just wasn't an option. So I really was concerned that they needed a good example of a healthy marriage and a healthy relationship. Like, how could I expect them to, value themselves and know how to find a good relationship and build a good marriage if I didn't and I hadn't figured that out? So that was my mission. And I was around 37 ish years old at that time. With, the divorce and the custody battle and all of that. I just determined to transform myself. And for the benefit of my girls, I needed to be my highest value person to attract my highest value spouse. And just head to toe transformation, lost weight, like styled myself, like really leaned into femininity and fitness and discipline and just all the good things. And I've always been interested in psychology, but at that time, I felt like it was it was a lifeline. Like, I just needed to understand relationships. I just needed to figure this out. And for some reason, I don't remember exactly why, but I came to the conclusion that this was something I could figure out. It had always kind of eluded me. Like, it was something. I'm a smart person. I can learn things. Why haven't I learned this? Is it unlearnable? Is it only like you only have it or you don't? Is it only instinctual? And in the end of it, I concluded, no, it is learnable. It is something you can come into later in life. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen that pyramid of unconscious incompetence. And then you go to like conscious incompetence. Okay, I know I'm bad at this. And then you go to the next level of conscious competence. And it's like, okay, I've figured it out. Now I can be good at it. And then eventually you get so good at it that it's like you're unconsciously competent, But so that's what I went through. And what I found was that the Bible had a lot of wisdom. There was a guide right
Amazing.
there all along, right? Who would have known?
Yeah.
Instructions, on polarity and men and women and marriage and love and how to build a family. And so I just really became a believer. I was just like, oh, God knows what he's talking about. So I guess I'll listen. And I found my husband. Now we've been married 5 years. And so that was, I'm 46 now. I was 39 when I met him. And we got married a year later. So at that point, I felt like, oh, I did figure it out, and I have proof that I figured it out.
Right.
So maybe I can help other people. So and he really saw how much light and joy that brought me to talk to other women and help people with their relationships. And really, dating for marriage was like my big niche, I guess, my specialty. And so he said, let's do it. Just quit your job and start coaching, and we'll see what happens. And that's just been amazing that he's supported me in that. And so I've been doing that for 5 years now.
What a wonderful story. Praise God for that. And I just want to highlight a couple things that you said. So you went through your divorce at 37 and then you got remarried at 39, 40. And so you turned from a toxic, destructive relationship that you had been in, I think you said for what, 10 years or 13 years or something like that. You turned that around in less than 2 years from falling out of like a high conflict divorce, and you, rather than falling into a pit of despair or bitterness or anger, which absolutely could have, you said, no, I'm going to figure this out instead, and you turned it around in it sounds like less than 2 years in a really powerful way.
Well, thank you. I mean, the divorce was so long and drawn out that it actually was finalized, I think, in 2014. And, so there was definitely a few years in there where I was down. I was very
Okay.
down. I got into some really toxic relationships. It wasn't, my husband wasn't, I didn't get it right the
Sure.
first time out of that bad marriage. In fact, getting it wrong a few times after the bad marriage was like really convinced. Okay, all right, I really don't know
Got
what
it.
I'm doing here. I really
Okay,
do
got
need
it.
to fix this. Yeah. But I think your timeline is accurate though, as far as like finding like the real solution. Like it is super quick turnaround,
Mhm.
and can really, people, I think women especially, I don't know if it's a normal belief that it's going to take years and years and years, but I certainly was surprised at how quickly you could turn things around, and understanding what does make a good marriage, that and understanding how to date for marriage, that it could happen in a year or so. Yeah, it doesn't need to take a long time.
Got it. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that for both men and women. There's something that you said earlier that I wanted to ask you about. Now, I have this radical opinion that I think men and women are perfectly capable of understanding each other. Like, I think that there will always be mysterious aspects about each other, but I think for the most part, we can really get each other. And I want to know what you meant by women derive a lot of their self worth from their relationships. Like, unpack that for me, because that feels true and I can understand it, but I just want to see the pieces of that, I guess.
Sure. Well, another classic, aside from the Bible, another classic relationship guide is John Gray's "Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus,"
Hmm.
and I think he does a great job of like really simplifying like what are the differences between how we think and how we deal with things. And but I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that men are more adept at dealing with things and
Hmm.
manipulating things and data and information and mechanical items or whatever. And women really focus on people and
Hmm.
relationships. And so, I think that makes total sense. And of course, understand, like, from a biological perspective, that, we birth the babies and we need to take care of the babies. And we need to, keep our family and our community structure strong. And so it makes sense that we would be focused on that and really, if it's something, I mean, I guess if you think of it in the sense of like men derive a lot of self worth from their ability to provide and achieve and bring home the bacon. That's a survival tool. That desire to do that, right, and that sense of fulfillment from being successful at it makes sense.
Hmm.
That's a survival mechanism right there. So I think it's similar for women, that if we're failing at the basic ingredients for perpetuating our species,
Hmm.
getting married and having babies, then we're feeling pretty empty, and we're feeling pretty much like a failure. So, and I think that's healthy to acknowledge and accept. Like, it's okay if that hurts. It's okay if there's some sadness there, because that might drive you to change and fix it.
So what about the women who, and I agree with you, what about the women who derive their self-worth from things? Because that's what I experience, and that's what a lot of men experience is women out there in the world, particularly under a certain age, who are still deriving their sense of self-worth from things, and they resist any notion of deriving their self-worth from
Mhm.
their relationships entirely, either because of
Mhm.
previously bad relationships or just because
Right.
there's this innate resistance to, I refuse to tie my self-worth to a man as some sort of cultural imperative.
Right. Well, I don't know that I can convince them otherwise, but
Yeah.
I've certainly worked with that's sort of the assumption, I guess, of many women that I work with. It's like we go out into the world unprotected and unguided on how to go to the next step as as we mature. How
Hmm.
do you start a family and establish yourself as a woman? And I part of my basic assumption is also that we as women do have access to a masculine side and are capable of tapping into a lot of the same skills that men have because I think that if you want to call it evolutionary speaking or
Yeah,
um, from biology's point of view, like that there were times that we would need to provide for ourselves or our
absolutely.
kids as well, right? Like the men are off at war, or they fell in a chasm or something, or they're all exploring across the sea to a new country or something. And so it's healthy to have access to masculine um, energy and masculine abilities.
Mhm.
And when we're kind of left exposed or left unaware aware of how to just be in our feminine, then that's just going to be the consequence is that we're leaning into masculinity. And I think that that's a healthy ability, but is it really what's ultimately fulfilling? And from what
Mm,
I can tell, it's exhausting. Like
yeah.
it's not sustainable. It's possible for periods of time, and you know, um, women do it for a long period of time, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily healthy in the long run.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's definitely what a lot of my clients and listeners like come around to is that, yeah, I've been doing it and like I can do the boss babe thing, but it's not really what I want long term.
Mm,
So, rediscovering and reaccessing our femininity it's hard. It's challenging when you first try it. It
mhm,
doesn't necessarily feel right or natural at first for everyone. But what I see and what I've experienced myself is that you actually then will come around to feeling more like yourself. Like, oh, I'm actually way more me than I ever was as the boss babe. I can put on that mask if I need to, but it's not really who I am at the core. And when I'm leaning into my femininity, then that's when I really do feel like myself.
mm. What are some of the thank you for that. What are some of the chief obstacles that women run into? Because I experience a lot of women who are going through this process right now. I've been living a certain way, living in my masculine, or I've been out there in the world conquering, and now I want to be a wife and mother, and I'm having to rediscover parts of myself that have always been there, but I've ignored or pushed to the side. What are some of the chief objections or roadblocks that women encounter along that way? Because this is not something that I can personally understand from
Mhm.
my own experience. The journey for a lot of men today is very different. It's more of a, I mean, it's the same kind of thing of bringing forth things that have been suppressed in many cases.
Right.
But obviously, the journey towards becoming, a righteous masculine man is very different from the journey. Like the journey of becoming a righteous feminine woman is like an unbecoming versus a becoming, right? So
Mhm.
maybe what are some of the obstacles that you find that women run into in that process?
Sure. Good question. One of the hardest things for women to do in this process is to receive, to start receiving. And one of my favorite authors, Laura Doyle, says, what's the essence of femininity? Receive, receive, receive.
Mm.
And that's just so hard for modern women to accept. It's
Mm.
like it's like we can sort of get conceptually that we're meant to, be given or bought, a big fancy ring or a big fancy house, or, it, you can kind of conceptualize that he provides and I receive, right? But in practice, it is so uncomfortable for us. I'll include myself in that. I remember the first time that my husband took me and my kids, like first met my kids and took us out for ice cream. I just went to get my wallet out and pay, and he gave me the dirtiest look. He was not having it. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. I'm so glad that he sent me that clear signal, but it was just
Mhm.
so weird and odd to let him do that. Um, and that's just such a hard thing
Yeah.
for women who are coming through this journey to accept. It's yeah, it's very
What is it? What is it about it that's hard? Because I've encountered this. I've been
yeah.
dating a bit over the past few months, and I've offered compliments and have them been like thrown back in my face. It's like
Oh
you can,
gosh,
and yeah, it's like you can say thank you. Like it's okay. Like you don't have to
right,
point out like why my compliment is wrong. Like I didn't get upset. It's
yeah,
like because I understood it as like it was a resistance. I didn't take it personally. It was an inner resistance to receiving. It's like you can just say thank you. It's okay. There's no one watching, right? So
right.
what can you unpack some of what that is?
Well, I think that a lot of it is culturally, being
Mm.
told that you're unproductive and you're essentially
Oof.
a waste of space if you're not, earning and paying and um, being, producing and,
Oof.
right? Like producing for the economy or whatever. We all need to be making an income. We all need to be efficient and effective in that specifically. Like it used to be okay to say that behind every great man is a great woman, right?
Mm.
Because she had a role to play.
Yeah.
And that was really true. It still is really true that we have a role to play as a complement to the masculine. That means we're the opposite. It means that if he gives, I receive. And I think a lot of it's cultural, but at the same time, I think that there's gonna always be a grain, maybe a temptation, you would call it, or maybe like, like a tendency to sin, like that I'm too proud,
Mm.
like it's just there, you know what I mean? And that is does take diligence to come off that high horse and to humble. I mean, you have to be humble, right? To accept that what someone else sees in you, maybe I don't get it. Maybe I don't see it that way. But I can humble myself and accept what they say anyway. If you're talking about compliments, but if you're talking about material things, then that's humbling too, right? That you need someone else
Mm.
besides yourself. And that's just really hard to accept when we've been told the opposite for so long. And I feel like I'm saying, like, you can't completely blame culture for that, because I do think it's Adam and Eve, it's the fall. We're human, we're flawed. Just like I have to tell my clients that that men are born to be leaders, but they're always going to struggle with that. They're always going to have to work at it, right? Like it's not just always going to be easy. And by the same token, it's not always going to be easy for us to receive and humble ourselves and be submissive and that kind of thing too.
I'm really appreciating this dialogue because you're offering the other side of the coin to a lot of things that I talk about. There's an idea going around, and I've talked about it on Twitter and Instagram lately, that when the right masculine man comes along, submission will just be effortless for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that idea is true. I think we want to believe that it's true. I think all the men who propagate that idea hold themselves as this image, like I'm a master of the universe and I'll show you how it's done. And women want to believe that the one will come along and it'll just be easy, like in the movies, so that it speaks to our imaginings of ourselves rather than who we really are, because men will struggle to lead. Like we just will. Like there's no, watch any movie. Like look at Aragorn. Aragorn is the classic righteous hero. And what is he doing? What is he doing with not Erwin? My gosh, my listeners are gonna kill me. His
sorry, I'm no help.
That's Arwen. There we go. Oh my gosh, they're gonna turn this off and throw it up. Arwen. He's expressing, at least in the movie, he's expressing his insecurities to her, and she's lifting his spirits. Right now, if we would put this into a modern context, people would say like, oh, she should just walk out the door because he's clearly not being masculine enough. But I think a lot of women look at Aragorn as that character as like, that's the kind of man I want. Well, guess what? At the last moment that they're put it in the movies, again, putting the crown on his head and he looks insecure. And that's like, a man should fear leadership, because the kind of man who's like, nope, give that to me, I'll take that, I would ask questions of that man. Let's put it that way. And so maybe you can talk through how you mentor women to be more comfortable with the notion that their man is and always will be imperfect, no matter how hard he tries, no matter how much effort he puts forth. That will have to be something that they have to be comfortable with, that there's no man that's going to be perfect.
Right. Yeah. And I think I like what you said about there being sort of I don't think you used the word fantasy, but I think there's sort of an element of fantasy that women have, that I'm going to be the tough adversarial, like untamable woman. And he's just going to come along and tame me. Right. Like, I can be as, right. You've seen, I mean,
oh yeah, there's
some ridiculous stuff out there.
Oh yeah.
You don't deserve me at my best if you can't handle me at my worst. And
oh my gosh.
Stuff. And I mean, what I tell women dating is that you have a job to do. And if you haven't kept up your role and practiced your role to the best of your ability, then you haven't allowed him to emerge or show himself in the best light possible. Like if you are grabbing your wallet and like trying to pay, then you've just put him in a totally different dynamic than being the gracious, receiving, and grateful woman that a man feels like he can take care of and feels like he wants to take care of. So if we don't show up that way, then we really can't expect. I mean, first of all, why would the epitome of masculinity want to fool with essentially a dragon he's got to slay every time he walks in the door? No, he's out in the world doing that.
Yeah.
And he can have any woman he wants. He's going to want the soft, feminine, safe place to settle and land when he comes home. So there's that piece. Why would he want to show up for a battle like that? But then also it takes two to tango. You can't, I mean, dancing's a great analogy, actually. If you're not willing to step backwards, then how in the heck is he going to lead you?
Yeah.
That's not going to be a very pretty dance. But as far as like how to deal with and just understand a man's struggles, I think that's part of the human condition too, that we're always going to be struggling with our side of it. And people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Like you it's there's we're always in a test. We're always being challenged to rise up and be our best self. And you can't slack on that. So if you want to say, well, I can't submit to him because he's not being masculine enough, then you've failed on your part as a woman. That
Based.
we have to keep up our side of it's just relationships are such a temptation. We're always in a temptation to blame the other person and fault them. And so I like to challenge people, women especially, to use that as a signal that, okay, I need to refocus on what's my role and where am I falling down and what do I need to do better. And I think men can do the same thing and do the same thing. We're going to find faults in our spouse when we don't want to look at ourselves in the mirror and we don't want to see, I got a lot of work to do. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know.
It does. It does. No, it helps. It helps a lot, and I think a lot of people listening to this will feel very. I know that I do feel very blessed by your answers, because I talk about something called the Great Reconciliation, and the Great Reconciliation is when both men and women agree to drop all of their bitterness over past hurts and step into the circle at the same time. So feminism, it's a whole separate conversation, grew up essentially by cultivating women's bitterness. That was kind of where it drew a lot of its emotional energy from. That bitterness has now fed, and that bitterness was so projected at men, innocent men who had nothing to do with it. Right, it carried forward in time. That has generated the red pill world, where now people are experiencing men's bitterness, and so you have feminists and red pill people going at each other and going at the public. Men are useless, women are useless. It's like, whoa, guys! Like, let's stop. Whatever legitimacy we may feel that our grievances may have, we're not going to be able to say, well, you apologize first. That doesn't get anywhere. We all know that from our lives. So we each, as both men and women, have to step into the circle of reconciliation at the same time. And what that means is both people have to take responsibility. Both men and women have to take responsibility for the ways that they've failed to show up. And I know many men that are willing to take responsibility for the ways that they've failed to show up. That's why I have a job. That's why I know thousands of other men that have a job. Is we're all talking to men in that way. But I find that there's a general cultural unwillingness to say the things that you're saying, which is like, hey, women, yeah, you kind of messed up too, and you need to take responsibility for that, not because of your ex-boyfriend or ex-husband or father or whatever, like you. And so the next question that I want to ask is, in your one-on-one sessions with women, you must get a lot of anger projected at you saying some of these things, maybe not screaming, or maybe screaming at you. Like, you get the brunt of that. Like, talk about that a little bit. I'm very curious.
Okay. You mean from my clients, or you mean like just like vitriol around like what my message is? What, like vitriol trying to hold women
on the internet? Vitriol?
No.
I haven't seen it. particularly more like person to person with your clients, because being in the environment to hold someone accountable, perhaps for the first time in particular ways that they're not used to, that can generate strong feelings. Let's start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky balance and a fine line to walk, because people can't change without taking responsibility and being accountable. It's just not possible. But at the same time, they do have valid grievances and complaints and reasons why they ended up in the place that they are. And so I think when we understand how we got there, then that can kind of relieve some of the burden that, yes, I'm responsible for my choices, but it's not like it happened in a vacuum. Like
Yeah.
there was some logic to it, right? I mean, so most of us really are going through life, or have gone through most of life, in a reactive state, and just really acting out the patterns that were established in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really hard to develop that self-awareness of what those patterns are and why they're there, and how to change them. One objection I've had to deal with a lot is, why should I change for a man? Why should I change myself to please men, right? And the way I answer that is that we're not only myself is not set in stone. Like I'm not only I'm not only these bones and skin and nerves, this nervous system, which is what enacts our patterns, right? It's where those patterns are ingrained, and then it's sends us our behavior down those same paths. Um, but then also the choices that we make
Mm-hmm.
create and create the person that you see in front of you. So do you want to be the person who is merely a product of those patterns that were ingrained by your parents? Or do you want to be a person that's a product of your choices, and you've actually overcome those patterns that were ingrained since
Mm-hmm.
childhood, or since trauma after childhood, or however it came about? And so when we accept that we do have that power to choose who we are, then you're free to choose how you want to show up. Do I want to show up soft and gentle and humble and forgiving, or do I want to show up hard and adversarial and um, contrary?
Mm-hmm.
And and a lot of those attributes or qualities that we think are like inherent in like who we are, really end up being like a coping mechanism. Yeah, they really were a response to not getting enough attention, or not getting the right kind of attention. If I want women to sit back and do more observing and listening, for the sex that is focused on relationships, we're actually not great listeners for to a large extent. Um, so I challenge women, especially in
Amazing.
dating, like, you have a lot of observing to do here. Like, this is not only important to boost his ego, or to get along nice with guys. This is actually a safety thing,
Mm-hmm.
because manipulators take what they hear you chattering off at the mouth about, and they use that to manipulate you. And so as women, and being sort of um, vulnerable to um, violence, manipulation, whatever, um, we need to zip it and do a little more listening. And a lot of women will object or protest that, because it makes sense on the front end why we need to observe. But then we'll also like fight back a little bit against that and be like, well, maybe I want to be a chatterbox, or talk about politics, or be a show off, or loud. And when I dig in, like, so to answer your question, I dig in, like, why is that the reaction? Why do you have um, that kind of compulsion? And usually, what I find is it's to cope with a lack of attention, or not the right kind of attention, and we're switching into those automatic responses, instead of really making a conscious decision of how we want to relate to the opposite
Mm.
sex. I don't know if that's making sense,
It
but
does.
that's what I That's what I find.
One of the things I've observed is that women will often talk about how empathetic they are, but I observe that the empathy extends to everyone except for the men in their lives.
Ouch.
Right. It's like, oh,
Right.
we're so empathetic. It's like, can you understand my experience as a
Are
man?
you?
No, no, no. Are you really? Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's,
There's a
it's,
wall up there.
yeah. And it's very difficult. Now, I like to be listened to as a man because we have a lot to say, and we can become chatterboxes ourselves, and we can lose touch with the connection with our audience and be talking to hear ourselves talk rather than talking to be heard, right? And
Hmm.
I think there's a little bit of both, but also you make a really good point that if you're vetting a man if you're a woman and you're vetting a man, like let him talk. He will
Hmm.
reveal himself if you're
Exactly.
right. And versus
Yep.
if he's listening to you all the time, he's gathering information about you when you should really be digging into him, and that's okay. You'll get him talking, and then you'll see who he is.
Hmm. Yeah. And what I'll get as an objection is, but what if I want to know about his values and his family and his, has he been there, whatever. What if I want to know this? Like, shouldn't I ask him? And I said, well, if you just listen, won't you know what he wants you to know? Like, that is that meta information, that data of, well, he didn't tell me about his family. So that
Mm,
tells you something, right? Like what he wants you to know or not know is really valuable information. And you're
yeah.
right. Men do want to talk and be listened to. And sometimes like it's such a common experience that they're not being listened to. So then when they go on a date with one of my clients, then now they can get it all out.
Yeah.
And they're really just like so tickled to have an audience that's actually listening. So sometimes that needs to like kind of flesh out and
Hmm.
and and get past that phase.
There was a tweet going around a couple days ago with a video about I think maybe King's Community, I think is the name of the account that posted it. That I guess it was a compilation of a bunch of guys who had been asked on TikTok or something like that. Who do you go to? Who do you talk to when you're going through something? And there was just like a string of like 20 guys, like nobody. Like I don't have anyone to talk to, and how isolated men are. And many of these men might have had girlfriends, right? Who they just feel like, yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the guys said like it's because I'm a man. They wrote it off to that, but I think some of it is cultural expectations, but some of it is a real feeling like I'll go to talk to somebody and they just won't listen. So many men are very used to not being listened to. I think men we can be very complicated creatures and very simple in some ways as well, but men have a deep need to be listened to and be appreciated for who we are inside. And it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily vibe with our appreciation for the Roman Empire, let's say, but recognize that our appreciation for the Roman Empire, that was another meme that was going around, that
Mhm.
our appreciation for the Roman Empire says something about us or construction or, electronics or whatever we're into. It can
Mhm.
be validated as a part of this man that you love, right? And
Yeah.
let him revel in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm amazed with my husband's memory for statistics and sports. He doesn't even really watch it hardly at
Mhm.
all, but it'll come up, Sports Center for a minute, and he remembers everything he just saw. So even if we don't care about the content of the rant or whatever,
Mhm.
we can appreciate, and we really do need to appreciate, well, oh, he's knowing or caring about all these things I don't know or care about, which means that I don't have to know or care about it, and that's a
Mhm.
blessing to me. And so we can appreciate that, and we really do need to, or
Mhm.
else we're living in discontent and um dissatisfaction just constantly.
So, say more. You mentioned the term fulfillment earlier, and I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what that looks like from a feminine side. I know what fulfillment can mean to men. What does it mean to a woman in this role? Because I think a lot of women have been guided by culture and upbringing to look at fulfillment in terms of fulfillment of their professional career goals. Like I am fulfilled when I become vice president of whatever, right? Because of my material success. what does it look like to be fulfilled from a feminine perspective, maybe even deprogramming from that, let's say, mountaintop?
Mhm. Well, I mean, just from a practical standpoint, I don't know if you're a fan or not, but one of the I don't know what you would call him, Scott Adams. Do you listen to him at all?
The writer, the Dilbert guy.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's all about persuasion, and um, one of his big concepts is systems over goals, and that got included in like James Clear's Atomic Habits and all of that. So
Hmm.
it's definitely out in the zeitgeist now, and I think it's a great mindset shift because like the reason I'm bringing this up is like you say like if we're basing fulfillment on like achievement of a particular goal, like vice president of whatever, that's like a moment in time, right? Like 99.99% of your life is in um, is unfulfillment of that goal, right? And then when you get there, that's like an instant. And then what, right? And now I don't have that goal in front of me; it's behind me. Now what? So the systems concept is that I set my life up to have routines in place that I know will get me the kind of life that I'm looking for. I know that it'll increase the odds of success in however I define that success. And so like say you want to lose weight and you know you have like a number in mind, and every day that you're not at that number is a failure, right? And so you're
Mm.
unhappy because you're not there. But if you have a system that where you work out every day, where you eat healthy food every day, then you know that you're likely to achieve that goal, but also you get to check it off your list every day. I've eaten healthy and I've exercised. And so you're living in fulfillment of that system on a daily basis, as opposed to that moment in time that passes and then we're unhappy again. So hopefully it's answering your question to say that I want women to set their lives up to have those moments and those you know those daily activities and rituals in place that signal, oh, I'm doing the right things, I'm making success likely, I'm on the right path, as opposed to like, did I achieve X? Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yes, it
So
does.
like even you know I mean you want to have kids, even that in itself is like a goal, right? And then I had kid A, now I need kid B, and now I need kid C. But if your system is I'm going to play with those babies and be grateful for them every day, and I'm going to connect with them, and I'm going to, you know, look at their sweet faces, then that's something that you can, you know, be in fulfillment of every day.
Hmm. Hmm. This is great. This is the conversation about these subjects that I've always wanted to have. So this is
Oh, nice.
yeah, no, it's because I think a lot of what's going wrong between men and women today comes down to mindsets that I think women have been given so much of what was supposed to be men's mindsets, and it's an entire shift of perspective for a woman to learn to think like a woman, right? In the
Right.
right way, right? And I think
Right.
a lot of the work that I do is a lot of men they wouldn't necessarily call it that, but they've been given women's mindsets as well, being very relational. And so there's a lot of like changing everything that's between the ears,
Yes.
right? And how do you
Yes.
talk about the way that how do you think about the way that you think? It sort of like
Hmm.
begins spiraling on itself.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it touches on everything.
Hmm. So I wanted to talk specifically. I didn't get the chance to watch this video on your YouTube, but I did see it about the weight loss topic because I have a particular perspective on that, particularly because we live in an era that Alexander Cortez on Twitter calls it obesogenic. Like the world is trying to make us fat. Like it didn't used to try. Now it's trying really hard, particularly in
Mhm.
America, and we all have to fight against that. But the weight loss topic for both men and women, but particularly for women, I think related to something in their psychology somewhere, I'm not exactly sure, is very, very sensitive and almost explosive, and yet it must be addressed. So I wonder if you
Mhm.
could go into some of the stuff that you talked about in that video, and I'll link it in the show notes as well.
Sure. Well, that was a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't watch my videos over and over again, so I don't
I can
remember
relate
what
to
I
that.
said. But but I know that you're right about mindset being huge, and that's why I kind of mentioned at the beginning, like that whole transformation. It really did start as a weight loss journey, and it is so difficult for women to like wrap our heads around that it's okay for men to judge us by like our silhouette, and that that's beauty is a part of femininity, and that doesn't mean that we all need to fall into the same box. That doesn't mean that we all need to be blonde haired, blue eyed, and Instagram ready, right? Men appreciate beauty of all shapes and forms and stripes and colors, which we can't comprehend, right? Like that's something that's hard to wrap our brains around too. Um, but then to accept, that I am a beautiful being, and that my husband, even if, might be a future husband, is going to appreciate that about me. And I want him to, right? And we all know deep inside that we want him to. Like there's no one's going to deny that to me. I won't buy it. But so it's like if you put those concepts together, I acknowledging I want him to appreciate me for my beauty. Okay, now if he's a future husband I'm thinking of, then how am I going to maximize my beauty to, just shine for him? And the way I explain that to women is that my husband literally will tell you that I had an aura around me when we first met, and that's what attracted him to me. And we have that aura when we feel it, when we feel beautiful, and it just so happens we have eyeballs and know if we're beautiful or not. So so it's hard to feel beautiful if you don't look the way you want to look, and that is hard to accept, but it's also a continuum. Like if we're working hard and having discipline on the inside, then we can also appreciate where we're at even when we're not exactly where we want to be, if that makes sense. It's like I said, I don't know if others can identify with this, but like I think as women, like, or at least myself, like I've worn something like an outfit that I thought was really, really super cute and went out and had that aura because that's how I felt. But then seeing a picture afterwards was like, what was I thinking? That was not cute. But it didn't matter because I had the aura of feeling cute. And so that's what I try to explain to women. Like, if you can dig into yourself and say, am I really doing what I feel I need to be doing to be beautiful? If that's a hell yes, then you will present as beautiful with that aura and be attractive to your man. Does that make sense? So it's
Yes.
like, yeah. So yeah, then the weight comes off. Then like if you're actually doing those things, it will follow that you will lose the weight. You will look better and better, and it's a constant lifelong thing to look good and look your best, and hopefully you're always growing in your style and your skills and your abilities and your discipline, so that can balance out the fact that you're also getting older. and and that's another thing that's really, really difficult for women to get, is that the man that's meant for you is going to appreciate you more and more, and always still see you as beautiful as you get older, and put on a few pounds and gain a few wrinkles. And that's really hard to comprehend. And that's why we have to humble ourselves and just accept it. If I know that I see something a certain way, then I have to, like you're kind of saying, that we can understand each other. And I don't know, I don't know 100% if that's true. Like, I think we can get the idea, but
Right.
we're not actually going to see it through each other's eyes. So there's that little leap of faith of acceptance. Like, okay, he probably sees it the opposite way that I do, just because I know that's how most things are.
Mhm.
And so even though I can't see it that way, I'm going to accept that's how he sees it. So I think I answered your question, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. I know that we can't understand each other completely, and the joke that I tell, like, women can never fully understand men completely because women will never have to walk into like a bathroom at a sporting event and understand the basic male experience of having to go to like the urinals at a sporting event. Like, that is a very basic male experience that we live with every day that a woman will never have to live with, right? And there's a thing about that, right? And so if you can't have that basic male experience that every man lives through, and that's just one of many,
No,
like it'll,
right.
and there are similar experiences for women, like getting your period for the first time, et cetera, like things like just won't understand. But I think that we can understand each other conceptually and come to see the way that people think about each other, think about things, even if it never becomes native to us.
Right.
Right. And so I like what you said about the right man for you will continue to find you beautiful and even more beautiful as you go through life, even though that doesn't make sense. Like, wait, what?
Right.
I look terrible today. Like, you look amazing. You're like, no, I don't. Because the beauty standard that you hold for yourself in your mind is so completely different than what he holds for you. And I've been saying lately, like, men often get accused of worshiping beauty. I think women's relationship to beauty is like a whole different, it's a whole thing that I don't
Right.
know if I can understand.
Right. It is a whole thing. It is. And when we can see that we have that relationship with it that isn't perfect, I think we can be a little more accepting of um, not understanding exactly how men see it.
Hmm. So I want to put a couple pieces together. So there's the desire within women to feel beautiful based on their own I guess standards for themselves, whether objective or not. But then receiving a compliment from, say, her husband, there's a resistance to receiving that compliment, right? Like, no, you are beautiful. Uh, can you help put those pieces together for me? I get it, but like, I want to understand what's going on inside the mind at that moment. It's like, no, I'm not. I know better than you. Is it like I am, but I can't accept that he's telling it to me? Like, is there a thought
Mm.
process there, or is it just a resistance?
Well, I think you touched on a lot of it, and it is like a tangle of
Mm-hmm.
many different reasons and factors. And because our brains are like a bowl of spaghetti, right? And so we don't know it's not a
So
straight
good.
line from like this is the reason, right?
Sure.
Um, and so we don't really know
I love it.
why it's so hard. um, but yeah, I think a combination of all of those things, and like I said, that he's going to see you differently than you see yourself. And that doesn't mean that he's blind. That doesn't mean he doesn't, get it. But do you really want to pick that apart? And do you really want to correct him and say, no, my hair looks worse today than it did yesterday? And I mean, because that is what we are doing when we're rejecting compliments.
Mm-hmm.
Since I brought up Scott Adams, one of my most telling stories that he tells, I think, is when he said that he was with a woman that wanted flowers and loved flowers and always wanted him to buy her flowers. But then when he did, she would joke and say, "Well, what did you do wrong? Are you that you have to apologize for? What's the special occasion? Why are you, like saying like he had to be groveling in order to give her the flowers?" And so what he said was, I quickly learned not to give her flowers. And so, that's what we're doing when we reject compliments, is we're teaching our significant other that we don't want compliments. And as hard as it is to accept them, I think it's much harder to live without them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, like I said, just we need to humble ourselves and say thank you and be grateful, even if we disagree.
Mm-hmm. It feels a lot like the difference in mindset would be something like a woman who is used to drawing her validation from her achievements in the material world will be resistant to drawing her validation, I guess, from not necessarily her achievements, but from her relational world. And so,
Right.
like, I want to compliment you, I want to tell you you look beautiful, or you look wonderful, or I love you, or give you flowers. It's like, no, I can't derive
Just
my
for
sense
being.
just for being. Exactly. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, and you mentioned, oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to, you had
No,
asked an
please.
earlier question that was like, what's one of what are some of the harder challenges for women when they're on this journey. And like you're saying, just being, and like you said earlier, also unbecoming the things that you've been taught to do for so long, is that's a real challenge. Just being in the present, like that's a huge practice of femininity, and in my book um, that I challenge women to be present, be fully present, and be in your body. Notice what's happening in your body. Like these are, I could go on and on about this stuff,
Mm.
but that's really, really challenging for a woman who's, um, just basing her worth on checking off achievements. And so what I try to use that to our advantage. If being present is so difficult, then put that on your to-do list. Put that on your achievement goal list and say, I'm going to accept this challenge. I'm going to do this very, very difficult thing and just be. And so it's you can kind of manipulate the mindset of achievement to look at the act of being present and not doing as an achievement in itself. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sort of use the inclination of your mind to achieve, I'm going to achieve being.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If it's so hard, then maybe it's worth doing.
Yeah. This is really helpful because it's helping me to understand a lot of things that I've observed in women that haven't made any sense to me. Why the rejection of compliments, why the checking out of conversation, or not necessarily not listening, but like up and out to go do the next thing, always in like, can we be and can we receive? It's making a lot of sense, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, like, I feel a lot of grief hearing it, because I regard the things that you're describing as women's birthright that's been
It really
taken.
is.
Or yeah, so please say more about that, because I imagine that's a big part of what you do with women.
Oh, it's just so beautiful to hear them say that they are feeling it and they're getting to experience those things that you just mentioned that are women's birthright. And part of my story is that when I met my husband, it was so romantic. It was just a perfect meeting story. And do you want me to tell it? Or
Please, yeah,
would that be okay?
yeah, of course.
So, I mean, we'd love this story. And when we were, first dating, like we would talk about it all the time, which I also recommend if you're courting, like reminisce of how you met and talk about those beginning days and just keep like, get them ingrained and set and really, just really create that solid foundation. So anyway, it was a summer night, a Thursday evening in July of 2017, and there's this beautiful rooftop downtown venue with like it's got like a koi pond and a rooftop like garden and then overlooking our beautiful downtown, which is surrounded by mountains. So I mean, just so picturesque. And I was up on the rooftop with some friends, and then my husband like walks up the stairs, and I saw him before he saw me. And I thought he looked like a college kid. Like I thought I was checking out a 20-year-old. And so I looked away really fast. And then he saw me as I was like looking up and away and avoiding eye contact. And then for the rest of the night, he was following me around and introduced himself and said, and asked me like what were my plans for the night and stuff. And I said I was going to go dancing a couple doors down later. There's like a salsa event or whatever. And so he kept like following me around and going, are you still going dancing? Are you still going dancing? And then we went and danced every, song and until, it was over and everything. And that it wasn't until after I had that experience and knew I'd met the love of my life that I remembered having that fantasy, that dream as a girl, that my Prince Charming essentially would see me and not be able to leave my side. Like it would be an irresistible force for him to then, he had no choice but to pursue me. And I had that was my dream as a little girl, and had talked myself out of it, had taught myself that was ridiculous, and completely forgot about it until it actually happened. And then I remembered that I had it. And so that's the experience that women have when they get to be in their feminine and be leaned back and get pursued. A lot of these women have never been asked on a date, have never been on a real date. I mean, I'm sure you're probably familiar with like the college scene and, Netflix and chill. Like women are not being courted. People are not having romantic relationships. There's no romance, right? And so when we get to experience it, it's like an awakening of what it truly means to be human, almost like that it is a birthright. This is a story that, like all these stories, how Jordan Peterson says about how stories are like part of what it means to be human. That's why all these stories like crop up in different places, even they're not related, but they have the same story to tell, right? Because it's just part of being human. And so that's what it feels like when you finally get to live out that like destiny. Then it's like, oh, I know what it means to be a woman now. And so I just love it that we get to experience that. And that's what my clients tell me, like that, oh, he's actually pursuing me. Like he actually like is at my beck and call. He treats me like a princess. Like these are the things that women want and are too scared to even admit that we do want, to the point where you just deny it, just completely deny it and push it out of our minds, but it's still there.
And you were finally in a place where you were ready to live that dream out.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And that's why it can happen quickly. It does. It just has to happen once you're ready.
Are you familiar with the work of Alison Armstrong?
Mm-mm.
Oh, that would be that's something that I think you'd really enjoy. So she's been writing about men and women for about 30 years, and her work has been very influential to me as well. In fact, she taught me a lot about what it means to be a man. She really understands men from women's perspective in a way that men like come to understand themselves and their relationship with women. And so, especially regarding the life paths of men, growing from like page to knight to prince to king to elder, like that was the first time I'd ever encountered those ideas. Like, why aren't men telling me this, right? So, so what she talks about is this thing called frog farming, right? Where some women want to kiss the frog and turn him into a prince. And
Mm,
what a lot of women will do is that they'll turn the prince into a frog,
mm,
right? Go the opposite way. And just how much you have to be ready to really
mm,
see that there are so many men around you that
mm-hmm.
could be a potential prince if you could just let them be that.
Right.
And that's a stage that women have to get to, and they begin following some of the things that she talks particularly about communication, like how women can communicate with men in a way that brings out the best. She calls it the hero's language. It's like words that call men to their best selves. It's
Mm,
wonderful. And as soon as women learn to stop treating men as adversaries and start looking at them as beings to respect and treating them with respect, their relationship with all the men around them change, and the men start treating them in a different
yep.
way. And they were there all along. There wasn't
Yep.
some prince who was going to fall from the sky one day.
Right.
It's literally been, how many different men have you not seen? They've been invisible to you because you had to learn to see them.
Right. Right. Yep. That's a great point. It's so true. It's so true. And it's so hard to open your mind to that
Mm-hmm.
as a woman, because you've done so much judging and so much eliminating and so much closing yourself off, that it's really, really hard to expand your mind that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
so true though.
So I want to. I'm not. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I want to transition now to talking a little bit about relationship dynamics and how you de-invert them. Because I'd imagine you probably get a lot of relationships where the woman's in a position of leading. Maybe she's always been there, and the man he's become more passive, and they have to right
Mhm.
that ship. And there's work to do with the woman, of course, to get her to step back, but then getting the man to step forward, like that is I get that question a lot. I get those questions all the time on Instagram. I really want to be led, but my husband is too passive. And I think there's a lot of elements to that versus, how much he suffered in the relationship versus is he truly a passive man? Because there's a lot of both. So how do you begin, de-inverting that?
Mhm. Well, my favorite saying is, the more Chad you are, the more trad she'll be. And so that's kind of the D inversion, right? It's
Right.
like, if and a lot of people have a hard time. I think that's partially what you're speaking to, is whose responsibility is it to fix the relationship, and why should
Both.
I be more feminine if he's not masculine and he's not deserving of it? And I mean, that's what I hear a lot, and I think I hear that from men too. Maybe less, but definitely it happens both ways. um she's not doing her part, so
Sure.
why should I step up? And I'm a huge fan of one side of the relationship just focusing on themselves and what they can do. And
Love it.
it's yeah, it seems like way more effective model from what I can tell than the counseling, like, who's going to do what, and that seems to be unsuccessful, more than it's successful. um so but it goes both ways. So if you're the woman, then you should be the one, doing your work and not worry about him. And if you're the guy, then you should do the work and not worry about her. um but I guess I'm not totally sure if there is a lot of just they're just weak and passive. I don't know. I think
Mhm.
that's a open question, and nobody knows until she actually does her part to be feminine and lean back and let him lead. I worked with one couple that, the guy would not do any of the plumbing. He would not unclog the toilets, and he would
Oh.
not kill the bugs. And she was like, "Why do I always have to be the one killing the bugs and plunging the toilet and stuff?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but what happens when you don't do those things?"
Mhm.
And she's like, "What do you mean? Just leave it there?" Like, it's like, "Yeah, I mean, why don't you see what happens?" And she did, and he went and he killed the bug and he plunged the toilet or whatever, and so it's I guess a little bit like Schrodinger's cat. Like, we don't
Mm.
know if the guy is passive or not
Right.
until you actually try to be feminine, and that's a hard journey. I'm not saying that's not a lonely, you know, thing to do. For a lot of wives live years struggling to do their part, and then he doesn't step up.
Mm.
So I'm not saying it's not difficult, but you never know until you actually do it and you actually try.
Hmm. Yeah, you have to give him a shot, and that's I've gotten this question so many. I can't even count the number of times I've gotten this question, either in email or in DMs, particularly on Instagram. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And that's kind of the place that I've gotten to, is like, well, I don't know you. I don't even know if you're a woman. For all I know, right? I got no idea. But have you really tried? Like, what if I were to talk to him? What would he say the dynamics are? Right? Like, she just goes and does everything before I even know, and then she gets mad at me for not doing it. Like,
Hmm.
maybe he didn't even know. Now look, if you're a man, you're supposed to kill the bugs and you're supposed to unclog the toilet. Like, come on, that's just how it's supposed to be. But again, if you take that responsibility on before he even has the chance,
Hmm.
and then blame him for not doing it, like, it sets up that dynamic where give him the chance to step forward at least.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunately a great fodder for viral videos to like
Yeah.
show how you do everything and he does nothing, and you go away and you come back and the house is a mess, and you know and I was just having this conversation with my daughter the other day. um I don't have a lot of sympathy for women that talk that way, like, I have to do everything. Okay, it, it sounds horrible, but who is the person in doing the things, right? There's a subject, there's an action, and the subject is the person doing the things, right? That means you have to be walking through those patterns that you're saying you don't want to be walking through. And that
Mhm.
means you had a choice to do that. So I have limited sympathy when you're continually walking through what you say you don't want to do. You have agency there. You made that choice.
Mm. So good, because there is a point that the limited sympathy that needs to be stated. Like, when it comes to accountability, like, accountability only offers limited sympathy. And I find that there's so much sympathy given by default in the culture that it overrides any notion that women can or should be held accountable. And I don't think that serves women at all. I think it's actually
No.
insulting to them. But
Right.
for whatever reason, it seems that women won't hear it from many men about accountability. I think that I can understand some aspects of that, but not all, which is why it's
Mhm.
very encouraging for me to hear that from you in the way that you just said it. It's like, I have limited sympathy for you. Like, you need to
Mhm.
feel that wall of, like, yeah, your complaints don't matter. Like, you have to take responsibility.
Mhm. Yeah, and maybe I'm talking tough, but I can't say that in those words to a woman.
Sure.
What I say is, tell me more. And it
Sure.
is women's, it is the women who are supposed to be teaching. The older women are supposed to be teaching the younger
Hmm.
women. So I don't um I don't know how much men are supposed to really talk about that, aside from in their own homes, of course. Um, but but yeah, one on one, it's kind of more like I'll just sort of have a straight face, because you're right. Like, there's just an assumption of women are right and men are wrong, and if you do it all, oh, woe is you, and there's nothing you can, you're just a victim of your your own choice to marry your husband, I guess.
Right.
Um, but the way I address that, I'm not going around talking to any stranger about their marital choices. But if I hear the complaints, then it's just sort of not making that assumption that you're always right as the wife, and then asking more questions. Oh, really? how does that work? And tell me
Right.
about that. Because I think we are just so used to it being assumed that even not assuming, even wanting to know more means you haven't already accepted the premise.
Mhm.
So that in itself could shake people up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't expect you to just go stone face and like deal with it, put the sunglasses on. That'd be kind of fun. But
That would be fun. Yeah.
but at the same time, the heart
I wouldn't get
posture.
invited to many brunches.
Aw, that's fair. That's well. Actually, actually want to talk about that in a second. Actually, maybe some of the pushback you've gotten in your offline life, or possibly even an online life as well. But I think the heart posture towards just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you're right about what's going on. There is another
Right.
perspective, a way to look at this, and like
Mhm.
we don't just bow like, oh, the woman said something, so okay, that must. And there's been a cultural pressure to do that, and but that doesn't make them right, and allowing someone to continue in their wrongness about their ideas because you don't want to make them feel bad does not serve that person. It's actually profoundly selfish.
It is, but it's also it's also the feminine dance too,
Right.
because we do have community to maintain, and we do have sort of the grapevine to contend with, and
Mm,
your kids, like, they need to be included, and so you're responsible for their social networks and everything too. So there's a lot at stake, and
mm.
so it is definitely um, a dance.
So this sounds like you've had some experience with maybe, I don't know, blowback, or people saying things to kids, or maybe getting text messages or phone calls or packages at the door that are ticking.
No, not too much.
I'm just
Not too
kidding.
much. No, I would have expected more because, with the internet, like, I use my real name, right? And so
Right.
anyone could find me if they did a ounce of looking. And but I think what I find is that the people who are meant for us are, they're going to gravitate towards us, and if they're not, then they move away, and that's just kind of what I've seen is, if and you're not going to help somebody who doesn't want to be helped anyway, so it's not
Right.
effective to be adversarial and really um confrontational. um and so why do it if you're not actually going to help anyone? So I it more you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. So that's kind
Mhm.
of my general attitude about it.
I appreciate that you mentioned also that the feminine dance, because one of the things that I've had to advise new male content creators on is you have to be very, if you're going to be very outspoken on a public level. There was one in particular who achieved public prominence very quickly over the course of the past couple of years. And I had to talk to him about this, that you have to be very careful who your wife is talking to. Because
Mm,
if you're in the news, then
mm,
her family or friends or whatever will speak to her, and you'll begin getting
mm,
pressure from your wife to soften the things. And she may not
mm,
mean anything by it, but she'll be experiencing the pressure, and it'll come through her to you. So you have to
mm,
make sure that if you're going to wage this battle, which I told this man I think you should, and he still
mm,
is, you have to make sure that she's ride or die for you, and that
mhm.
that feminine dance matters less to her than your success as a man and your success as a couple.
Well, and that's where the marriage dynamic comes into play too, because what are your values as a married couple?
Yeah.
What is your philosophy as a couple? Um, because there are definitely a lot of couples that they let their families come between them, and they let
Mm,
those lines get blurred. And if you're not really clear on what's the hierarchy here, who's in the inner circle, and who's really primary, then you're going to run into some things like that. And even if somebody portrays like Christian conservative values, that does not mean that they've really internalized those concepts. And, unless you've really had those conversations and you've really seen them walk the walk
Mm.
and make those choices. Does that make, yeah,
Yeah.
because like they could be saying in theory, yeah, you're my number one, I'm your ride or die. But then if they are consistently choosing, family, their family or friends or other influences, then, it's just lip service.
I have such appreciation for the honesty and clarity you answer these questions with. I just really needed to say that. It's like, it's just it's a blessing to me to hear the way that you think about these things and the way that you express them. It's like, oh, yes, okay. So thank you for that.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, no, thank you. Because I think that there's a tendency or a temptation that's always there to, not necessarily in you, but in talking about these issues, to beat around the bush, or to soften some edges, or to not tell it like it is. Not that you're going hard, but you speak in this way that it's like, no, I really believe this. This is a heartfelt, core up belief, and I can express it in a way where you feel that, but you don't feel run over. Like, I don't feel run over by what you're saying. It's like, no, this is how it is, and it feels very inviting. And it's so difficult to communicate those ideas this way, and I have such appreciation when I encounter it. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice.
You're
Appreciate that.
welcome. So I think I think the last subject that I want to tackle is submission versus surrender. I listened to your video on that, and I thought that was a really good way, because the word submission immediately creates all this instant red blinking alarm
Mhm.
bells and everything like that, and it's like one of those cognitive red light words.
Mhm.
So I like how you use the word surrender instead, which I think encapsulates a lot more of this idea of receiving. So I wonder if we can
Mhm.
just talk about that for a minute.
Sure. Yeah, I like the word surrender too. And I don't. Women definitely have more of a tendency to engage with some, like, I don't know how to describe it, like woo woo concepts, right?
Mm.
And um,
Yes.
and so I find that there's a lot of overlap, and we kind of talked a little bit about like speaking to like secular versus Christian values. Um, and there's definitely an overlap there, but I think surrendering sort of gives more possibilities of how to look at something. Like it kind of breaks the walls down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like if you're talking to a woman, I mean, I've talked to Christian women. They say they believe what the Bible says. They say they want to do what God calls them to do, and yet they've got so much resistance to
Yeah.
submission, and you're supposed to call him Lord, and they just cannot do it.
Right.
Um
That was like my
but
podcast last week.
yeah,
Literally, yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so one way that I can sort of get around that is, how is that working out for you? Or do you feel like you're fighting against reality here? Do you feel like you're trying to grasp like water and it's just, it's falling through your fingers? Like maybe we need to go with the flow a little bit. Maybe what we're surrendering to is um a higher power, to reality itself, to just the human condition, right? And so if we're being more practical and doing what works, then it kind of it allows, I think, women to open up the possibility, like, okay, maybe I don't need to obey him per se. Maybe I need to obey the just sort of the laws of the way the world works and life itself. And like maybe I need a teammate, and um I need help. And if I surrender, then I'll get that help.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a way to introduce the same set of ideas without using such a word. It's a scary word. Whether the word in and of itself is scary, certainly the charge that it has in our culture is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked what you said in one of your videos about um, women being afraid of losing themselves, something like that. And my question was like yours, like, what makes you think that this self that you're afraid of losing is so good?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm so afraid
Yeah.
of it. Well, okay, what makes you think that that would be a bad thing? Maybe it's a good thing that you lose that self, right? And so surrender can soften that. Please go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, I was just gonna say I don't think that would be taken so well
No, no, I
if it
mean,
was said that way.
we're
But
all
yes,
friends here.
no, I know, you're right. Um, okay, so what was the question?
Well, it was more
um,
along the lines of the way that surrender introduces a bunch of concepts that submission makes sound really scary.
mhm. Well, and then I guess I want to also be clear what we're talking about here,
Right.
because there's always going to be the people that are like, well, and I mean on both sides. I've seen both ways where there are wives who are e- losing themselves,
Right.
and that's not necessarily, more of that isn't necessarily helpful to the relationship,
Right.
and so one of my videos, I tried to address that submission or surrender doesn't mean suppressing your perspective, because if you are a feminine woman who believes in really the power of polarity, and that God created man and woman for different, complementary purposes. Like, we serve a role. We have to show up to the relationship and to the marriage. And like we were saying about behind every great man is a great woman, she's not silent. She
Hmm.
is voicing her perspective, and she has a vision to convey that gives him direction, and where's he putting his efforts. And I don't know how that sits with you, or how that feels to you, but that's what I've seen. And I've also heard of biblical stories that essentially back that up, that women have an intuition and an emotional language and a feeling nature that men value, that
Hmm.
a husband values in his wife. And if she is not providing that, she's not voicing it, then he's lost. He's losing, she's losing, everyone's losing when
Hmm.
you don't show up to the marriage. So we're not talking, and I'm speaking for you too, but I don't think we are talking about completely suppressing yourself out of the relationship, and he's the only voice that matters. That's not what we're
Hmm.
saying. We're saying that that we have special roles to play, and we need to play that role to the fullest.
Hmm. No, I think that's probably the video that I listened to, and the classic example is like Proverbs 31. Like in Scripture, the Proverbs 31 woman is incredibly capable in all different fields of life in terms of both caring and leading and producing and managing, right? And there that isn't existing in a world where she's like challenging and running her husband over. That's existing in, I trust you to make decisions on behalf of the family, and a good man needs to hear her voice,
Mhm.
right? And so what often gets lost in the discussion is like, no, I want to hear what you have to say, and I still make the final decision, and it has to be that way. And it
Mhm.
seems almost like we can only have one or the other, right?
Mhm.
Well, if he gets to make the final decision, then that just means I can't say anything at all. Or if I get to
Right.
speak up, then that means he has to listen. And we have to be able to keep these two contradictory ideas in mind at the same time. Like, you still get to be you, and I want you to be you, because unless you're you, I can't love you, right? And
100%. Yep.
someone has to drive the bus, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And
Yep. And co-CEOs is not a thing.
that's right. That's right. It just makes it. I have a thing that I'm going to write on Instagram about this, but basically, like, you come on board his mission, right? You come on board his mission and you help his mission, you build a mission together. And if you aren't comfortable with that, you're either going to get a man who comes on board your mission, which becomes a doormat, or you're both going to be fighting for a lifetime.
Right.
Those are your choices. I don't make the rules. I just work here, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, the way around all that is to say both parties have to want the same thing for the same reasons, and that this isn't some arrangement that's being imposed by men on women. This is the power of the gospel. This is what the gospel says we are both supposed to want, that we are oriented to individually, right? And that is the most important thing, because I think when someone really gets that from a deep core level, there's no contradiction. Like, oh
Right.
yes, submission, surrender, like, yeah, of course, I love him, this is what I want to build with him. But getting to that mindset, it's so difficult. I mean, it's a heart
Mm-hmm.
transformation thing, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and it's a constant thing, I think,
Hmm.
too. It always requires effort and work. I don't think that ever goes away completely.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's a daily practice.
So I wrote down 3 words while we were chatting: submission, surrender, and suppression. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think the fear of both submission and I think the fear of submission is that it has suppression included
Mm-hmm.
in it, which it doesn't necessarily. But
Right.
surrender
It
feels like a
shouldn't.
much more. It shouldn't. That's right. But
Right.
surrender feels like it has a much more inviting feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm a little
Right.
scared that um biblical
Yeah.
fundamentalists are would have an issue with switching the words around, but also to
Right.
me it's how do we get closer, and if it's at least I know from myself that these concepts brought me to the Bible from a secular place, then I'm sure that's happened for other people too. And so
Hmm.
I want that to be an option, that understanding how masculine, feminine polarity and marriage is in the order, in God's order, then I think that leaves room for people to understand, Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can understand the fear of fundamentalists getting hung up on the word submission. I get that, and I think that perspective or that position would sort of indicate a lack of recognizing like what time it is. Like if we're
Hmm.
going to get I don't mean you, but if we're going to get fixated on a particular word, recognize that culture, because of the failure of the American Christian church, has enculturated women in feminism generationally. Like it's in the bloodstream now. And
Hmm.
so going at a broken culture with the heaviest word in the arsenal, the sledgehammer
Hmm.
word, is
Right.
not right. I mean, go for it. But
Right.
that's what generates fears of like the Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that,
Right.
right? Right.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
there's a need to learn how to communicate these ideas in a
Hmm.
way that's inviting, because you're not going to take the women's liberation genie and stuff it back in the bottle by force. Like, that's not
Hmm.
how this works. Like this has to be a consensual action on behalf of both men and women for us being and becoming our highest, most godly selves. And you can't coerce that out of somebody. And the ambiguity is so intensely frustrating because the stakes are so high. And yet, has God got it or not? So we
Right.
don't have to put it all on ourselves with a sledgehammer word. We can use more inviting language to paint a picture that people can buy into.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. Thanks.
Wonderful. So
Mhm.
real quick, do you want to talk about your ebook for a second? I know that you mentioned it, so I just wanted if you want to just chat about that for a second. It sounds very interesting.
Sure. It's called intentional polarity. And that means that we're having to go through those stages that I talked about of, we lost that competence and need to
Mm,
regain it. So we're doing that intentionally. And I really like it. I think it is inviting and gentle, and also very practical and helpful, that you will I hear from women, they email me after they read it and say that I know what to do now on dates. Like, I've this is really, really helpful, that I can really picture it. Sometimes when we read guides of what to do or not to do, you can't really picture how that would
hmm
work. in practice. So I'm all about being practical and actually getting women taking those steps, going out on those dates, and finding it enjoyable, and changing the whole mindset of how to date, so that you can attract that man that's going to sweep you off your feet, and it's going to be romantic and fun, and it's going to be um, it's going to get you what you want in the end, not just a loop of dating and dating and dating and staying single.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Let's be sure to send people to that. This has been a beautiful conversation. I've been very blessed by it. Like, praise God for your journey and for you lifting women up and encouraging them in this direction.
Well, thank you so much. Well, it's been great to talk to you. I appreciate it.
So where would you like to send men and women to find out more about you and what you do?
LeilaTomasone.com or Limitless Leila on X. So it's at Limitless Leila.
Wonderful.
Leila is how you spell my first name.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much, Leila. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.